Welcome to Basic Brewing Radio for Thursday, August 4th, 2011. I'm James Spencer. Here at Basic Brewing Radio, we're all about home brewing. With this week, a yeast experiment from north of the border. Homebrewers Danny Seeton and Matt Anderson join us in San Diego to taste 3 rounds of an experiment comparing English and Belgian ale yeasts. If you're new to home brewing and would like to get into the hobby for the first time, check out our website, basicbrewing.com, where you can find archives of our audio and video podcasts and our DVDs to walk you through basic and more advanced brewing techniques. Also, you can find our brewers' logbooks to help you log and track your batches of beer. You can follow me on Twitter. I'm Basic Brewing, all one word. Also, you can find me on Facebook at facebook.com/basicbrewing.james. And our show page on Facebook is at facebook.com/basicbrewing. Thanks again to everybody clicking on the Amazon.com associate link on our basicbrewing.com site. Whenever you think of Amazon, think of us and click on our associate link first. It won't cost you any extra, and you'll be helping us to bring you this show, and we appreciate your support greatly. We also have associate links for Brew Your Own magazine and the American Homebrewers Association on our site, too. And you can find us, find our application, our little app on the iPhone and Android podcast app directory thingy there. And we're also in the BlackBerry podcast directory, too. We've got some good comments from last week's show with the results of the Brew Your Own magazine Basic Brewing Radio collaborative experiment on rehydrating dry yeast and whether it affects your beer. The first comes from Jared in Sydney, Australia. Jared says, your last show on rehydrating dried yeast was great. Thanks, Jared. However, there was part of the experiment that I think you missed. Future generations of yeast. Jared says, I rehydrate my dried yeast with water and nutrient. After 2 or 3 generations of repitching US-05, I find the results significantly swing in favor of rehydration. I suspect this is all about cell health. I realize that repitching dried yeast is not common in the USA, but when all that healthy slurry is ready, it would be a shame to waste it. Jared says, use-by date is another factor. I think you'd find that the older the dried yeast is, the bigger the preference swing will be towards rehydration after the first generation. I suspect this is more of a viability and pitching rate effect. All good points, Jared. If you're planning to repitch the slurry from your beer into another batch of beer, or if you have dried yeast that's getting close to the expiration date, maybe you want to take the extra step to rehydrate going into the fermenter. Tim writes in after reading the extensive report from Jacques Bertens in the Netherlands, he's been doing research on the topic of rehydrating yeast for a while. And Tim says, I was listening to the show you aired regarding yeast rehydration, and something occurred to me regarding the Dutch experiment. He may be coming to different conclusions because of something different about his water. I have no idea what local Dutch water supply is like, but is it possible that one variable in the whole experiment is the water quality or the water's mineral or chemical content? Perhaps a pH or chlorine content could stress the yeast. That's an interesting point, too. If you've got nasty water, for instance, you may want to use spring water to rehydrate your yeast, but you definitely want to at least filter out the chlorine before putting your precious yeasties in there. So maybe that was a variable that across all the brews that Jacques gathered data on in his report. Maybe that was one of the variables. And along those lines, Fred Johnson, who you've heard on this program before, also had a look at Jacques' report. Fred had some questions about the statistical methods that he used, but he also had this to say. Fred says, because there was no attempt to match the types of worts that were used in the fermentations, the validity of the experiment is dependent on achieving a balance between the experimental groups for all of the variables, besides rehydration, that could affect attenuation, the endpoint. There should be an analysis of as many of these variables as possible before one can make any conclusions regarding the effect of yeast rehydration or no hydration on the endpoint. Apparently, no such analysis were performed, so there's no reason to conclude that the reported difference in the endpoint was due to yeast rehydration variable and not due to something else. The observed endpoint difference could have easily been due to differences in another important variable, such as the percentage of sugar adjuncts in the wort, the mash temperature, or a host of other variables. If additional data on these variables were collected, they should be summarized and presented by yeast rehydration/no hydration groups. That's an interesting point. Thanks, Fred. When you ask a bunch of brewers to do an experiment like this, as we did, or if you collect data from a large group of brewers as they simply go about their business making the beers that they love, and as they report the data to you afterwards, there are a ton of variables. For instance, ingredients of the wort, the hydration method that they use, fermentation temperature, the variables that Fred mentioned as well. However, let me put my devil's advocate hat on here. Even though there are all these variables, couldn't you assess general trends over the whole group? In other words, these brewers are brewing the way that they brew in real life, not in a lab, not in a controlled environment. Couldn't you look at the data that Jacques collected and say, in the way real home brewers brew their beers in general, as they just brew every day, the benefit to hydrating yeast is not substantial overall, or something like that? Couldn't you draw some conclusions based on the real-world data that was collected? Then, if you want to take it a step further and you want to design the optimum way to rehydrate and pitch the yeast for the maximum effect and encourage brewers to take those steps precisely, maybe you could see an impact in the overall numbers over time. Maybe, if you got brewers to standardize the way that they hydrated the yeast, maybe you could see an impact, a positive impact over time. But, is that real life? Is that the way it really happens? I don't know. It's an interesting discussion that is probably best to be discussed over a pint of beer. We get into philosophy here. I appreciate Fred's experience and opinion, and I have shared his thoughts with Jacques. And if nothing else, I hope that our episode from last week and the discussion following has you out there thinking about whether rehydrating yeast is best for you and in which circumstances it may be best for you. So I hope you'll play around with it a bit yourself and draw your own conclusions on hydrating yeast. Okay, let's get into the program before I lose my voice altogether. This is the third of 4 experiment shows that we recorded out in San Diego at the American Homebrewers Conference. Danny Seeton and Matt Anderson drove all the way from Canada to attend the meeting, and they were kind enough to bring along some tasty brews to share with us.
Well, here we are in the nice shady patio again, and I could get used to this, just spending the day tasting beers, talking about beers, recording things about beers, learning things about beers. Joining us are regulars, Andy Sparks.
It's great to be here.
Steve Wilkes.
Hi, you didn't mention drinking beers.
I didn't?
I don't think.
Oh, well. Smelling, drinking beers. And joining us all the way from Canada are Danny Seeton.
Nice to be here.
And Matt, introduce yourself.
Matt Anderson from Vancouver, BC.
Now, this is your experiment.
Yeah.
And we've got, 17 beers here sitting in front of us? It seems like a daunting challenge. And I have to say that I'm not going to try. I don't think it should be our goal to drink all of the beers.
No. It's really just to try each one and see what you can get from it, and small samples.
So walk us through the concept of the experiment. What are we doing here?
So I want to do a bit of a yeast trial. I started out brewing with 1098 Yeast British Ale 1 and just use that for, probably almost a year and a half, and never understood why other people use different yeast until I tried the same recipe done by somebody else with a different yeast, and it was such a huge difference, and I never thought of looking at the different English yeasts. So I did one batch of porter and split it up into 6 little 1-gallon carboys and put a different smack pack in each one and fermented them out and bottle conditioned them. And then after doing that was really interesting. We brought that to a homebrew club meeting, and I decided I'd like to do a Belgian one while I was at it. So I did a Belgian amber, and then after spending all of that money on yeast, which got really expensive, I decided to do a Belgian dark strong on top of the yeast cakes from the amber, and just look at the difference between the different yeasts.
Cool. So you only had to buy yeast twice, which it makes it less painful. But an entire smack pack for, what'd you say, 1 gallon gets to be pricey.
Yeah, in our homebrew club, we have a bit of a yeast exchange. If you have a bunch of yeast, and you can prop it up and give little samples to people. So I got to give out all of the Belgian yeast. One of the guys in our club wanted. He wanted everything, so I gave him little jars of each one. So they got put to some use. But the English yeast, the one that I ended up, a few of them I repitched into other batches of beer and did a stout with one of them and stuff like that. But so I stretched it a little bit, but it was still a lot of money when I finally got to the till.
Well, we appreciate your sharing the results with us. So, it helps stretch out your dollar a little more, your Canadian dollar even more, by spreading the information around the world. So we appreciate your generosity in doing that. So tell us about this first beer that we're going to be, the base beer that we're going to be tasting.
So the brown porter was pretty simple. It was a recipe that I got from one of the homebrew meetings, and it was one of the first brown porters that I had that was really good. It's one of those beers that you think back on the style, and that was the defining beer that finally made you understand that style. And I just thought it was amazing and wanted to get the recipe from him, and he just kind of off the cuff told me pretty well what was in it, not the exact amounts or anything, but a little bit of this and a little bit of that. So I decided to go home and make that, but then never got around to it. It's one of those, you write a recipe and it sits in the book for a while, and then you finally get to it. So it's just simply a brown porter. Ended up about 5.6% on average. Some of them are a little bit higher attenuation, so the top was 6.5 actually. Wow. Was one of them, but pretty simple brown porter. Kind of the flavor hops are all Fuggles, 2-row, bit of Munich, some chocolate, and some brown malt. That's about it.
And what were the 5 yeasts that you used?
So I used the 1098, the British Ale one, which is what I've been using for a long time. I used the London ESB, the Thames Valley, the Whitbread, Ringwood, and I used the Scottish Ale, but somehow the 6-pack that I set aside for you guys, that bottle disappeared, and I have a feeling it was my roommate's back home.
Well, it was a long trip down from Canada.
That ended up being the yeast I picked out of all 6 of them, which is kind of just the ultimate kicker on top of that, but it disappeared, and that happens.
Well, so what we're going to do is we're going to taste, we're going to shut off the recorder, we're going to pour these, we're going to take some thoughtful moments to make some notes and compare and contrast, and then after the break, we'll get back together and record our comments. Anything else that you could say before we go into the tasting?
No, I'm really thirsty. Looking forward to it.
All right. Well, we will be back in a microsecond. Okay, we've gone through the first round of tasting, and it's difficult. This round was difficult, and Danny, you said that one reason why it may be difficult is because these beers may be getting a little long in the tooth.
Yeah, substantially. When we had them before, and the last few times I've tasted them, they're a long time ago, but these got bottled in November, which is quite a few months past.
So let's just go around and get some impressions. Who wants to start? Andy, do you want to start?
Sure. They're all fairly clean, but they're all very similar. I struggled. I went through the first 3, and I was really, they could have almost been the same beer to me, which, I was expecting more difference. I was pleased to see that there might be a reason for that, besides just the fact that I've drank probably 3,000 beers in the last 48 hours. So, but all in all, interesting. I think the last one, I think it was the ESB yeast, is probably my favorite, and it seems to have a little more body, and that's, I think, what I like about it out of all these. Anyway, I think the ESB is my favorite.
Yeah, the ESB had the most carbonation out of all of them when it came out.
Yeah.
Steve?
I think that number 1, which is the Tim's yeast, won my best of show for the bouquet. I liked the way it smelled. The number 1, number 2, and number 3, which is the Tim's. You guys correct me if I'm wrong. The Ringwood and the Whitbread. They're all pretty much the same beer to me. Number 4 was very wine-like. And which one was that?
Yeah, that was 1098. I agree with that. I found it very
1098.
Yeah, I found number 4 very vinous, and the Ringwood had a nice darker fruit flavor. But number 4, the 1098, very vinous, I thought.
And then I would finish up by agreeing with Andy that number 5, the ESB version, was far and away my favorite.
Danny?
I think we're all going to say the first 3 are very, very similar. The Thames Valley, I got the book in front of me, so I have my numbers. The Thames Valley was the most attenuated, so it got all the way up to 6.6% off a OG at 1058. It went down to 1008, and it went really far down. The Scottish, which we don't have, was the only one that went further and only went to 1007. But Thames was really good, and when we did the tasting in our homebrew club and at our AGM, the Thames took the vote for the best one.
Wow.
The first 3, I get a huge oxidation note off of them. It's that slight papery thing, which you can hide in a porter, but it's got that acid note at the end. That's one of those little-known flavors that comes with oxidation. The British ale, I got just old dates. If you find old dates in those stupid little styrofoam packages, my dad loves those things. He used to leave them in the kitchen, and you'd find them in some cupboard. And the vinous, it's very, very strong in that, and not a bad acid, but it's interesting. And then the ESB, by far, is definitely the best ones here. It's got body, it's sweet. You can pick up malt in them that you don't pick up in the other ones. It just comes through really nice. When we originally had that one had some serious diacetyl in it and under attenuated, and so I think when we bottled in November. I think when was our AGM? January. So we probably had them I think I had them in December. It was the first time I had them at a meeting, and then January we had them. And both of those times, that ESB was still had a diacetyl. So it took a long time to get rid of it. Now it's great, I guess. If you want to age a porter way, way longer than you should, ESB is a good choice.
And start with some butterscotch at the beginning. Can you run down quickly what the alcohol, the ABV of each of these was?
Yeah, all right. So the OG was 1058. The final gravities went. The Thames had 1008, like I said, so 6.5%. The Whitbread was 1012 and 6%. The Ringwood was 1012 and 6%. The 1098, so the British one, was 1015 and 5.6%, and the ESB only went to 1015 and was 5.6%.
Matt, your impressions?
Number 1, very dry. I guess that was the Thames, and the Ringwood was maybe my favorite in terms of the yeast character. The esters that were coming off of that were maybe my favorite, and number 5, the ESB, by far the best balanced beer. I'm not sure if that was how much yeast character that is. It's just the way it turned out. So,
yeah, I was real happy to hear that you guys couldn't tell much difference between the first 3 because I was stumped. And I have to say that I was thinking that these tasted a bit old, but and I would agree that the ESB does stand out as the one with the most interesting character. It's kind of a fruity. It had a bit more body, and it could be because of more carbonation, but. Yeah, it's definitely the most drinkable beer of the 5. So we're going to move on to in the Belgian world. Tell us about this next base beer.
So this was one of those classic misnomers. It was supposed to be a Belgian pale ale, and ended up. I'm calling it a Belgian amber because it's not pale. It's amber. Big Pilsner base, bunch of Munich, Vienna, some Crystal 30, Carapils, and last time I was in Portland, I picked up some Carafa too, so chuck that in for a little bit of color. Sterling hops throughout, and split up the yeast, and I have the numbers here, but so the yeast numbers were 1214, 1388, 1762, 3522, 3711, and 3787, which is, if I remember correctly, is the Abbey 1 and 2, Trappist High Gravity, not in order.
Well, we can during the break we can look those up on the internet and get those so that they make a little more sense. But
they're essentially all the big Belgian yeast that Yeast does, and then the Belgian Saison is the only one that's the French Saison is the only one that's out of there. But on the website and from guys I've talked to, and you get a lot of people finishing of stuck fermentation or something just to push the alcohol down with that. So I wanted to see what from the start. Like, I know a lot of guys that do big Belgian beers or like Strongs or Ambers or whatever, and they dry it out with that yeast. And I kind of wanted to see what that was like from the whole way through. I've had it in Saisons, but that's a very different malt profile and hop profile that you're working from.
Okay, interesting. So we will we'll take another pause and we'll rinse and we'll look up some stuff on the internet and we'll come back. Okay, that flight was a lot more fun than the first. Now, how long have these been in the bottle? Just got to get his notes.
Yep.
You need some sort of logbook, whether you're.
It's not your logbook. No, it's got my university on it, so that's I went with them instead of you. These went in the bottle in early March, and so yeah, Pilsner base, bit of Munich, Vienna Crystal, Carapils, a little bit of Carafa for some color, which is probably where I went from the Belgian Pale Ale that I was trying to make and ended up making an amber. This is one of the few beers I've ever made where the color turned out completely different than how I imagined it in my mind. Sterling hops, it's the OG started around 1055. The final gravities were all really close. The top one was 1006 and the bottom one was 1002. But they were really close, so they're all rocking the 6.5 up to 6.9 is the top one, which is why we're all feeling it.
Yeah, speak for yourself. Let's start this side this time. Matt, you want to go?
Sure. So my clear favorite was number 4 with the Ardennes yeast. The flavors of craft were a lot more complex than the other ones. The esters were excellent, with a close second being the number 1, which was the Belgian Strong Ale. 3711, a little too dry, over attenuated, very biting, bitterness, dryness, but all pretty good for the most part. Yeah. Quite a bit different. I like the Ardennes. That was good. My favorite was the Trappist High Gravity. It had all the noses were pretty similar. There's some differences in some of the phenolics, but if I kind of went through all of them, the Belgian that Matt liked, I got a little bit kind of combination with dates and that little red box of raisins. Yeah,
it was really a sweet raisin note, which was nice, but I liked all of the yeasts. For this specific beer, I preferred the Trappist. That was kind of the whole point of the project in general, is to see what the different yeasts do and kind of go, wow, this yeast would be really good in that beer. And that's kind of what I get from tasting all of these. The Belgian Abbeys, both of the Abbeys were really similar, I thought. Like, they were hard to kind of pull apart. The Abbey 2 seemed to, and the taste, I got more of the dark malt. It dried out a little bit different, and this weird, it just sat on my cheeks. It didn't leave my mouth. It was a weird mouthfeel difference that the only thing I could pull up between the two of those, which is, that's when you're not doing a blind taste test, I guess you get some of those things that you're trying to compare the two. If they have the same name, there should be how much difference is there between them.
So you like the Trappist High Gravity, the 3787 the best?
Yeah, full body. I agree with the French Saison, attenuated like crazy. It was grapey. You said it was biting, but it's not quite the tannin note, but it's the other note that you get kind of in a grape skinny thing, that a little biting. But no, they're all good. The Ardennes is wonderful. I use this yeast eventually and brewed a Saison with it, and it's awesome in a Saison. I wouldn't use it for this beer.
Interesting. Interesting. I'm going to save my comments for last. Steve, are you ready?
Yeah, sure. I think Matt and I were completely 180 degrees out. I really liked the 1214, which is the Belgian Abbey. I just liked it had kind of a nice bubblegum sweetness that appealed to me. I would agree that the Saison was really dry, and then I also found a little bit of astringency in the 3522 that I don't want to say we're splitting hairs here. I don't want to say it was off-putting, but it had a kind of a bite that, taken in little small sips, I didn't care that much for. But I have a feeling that if I had a pint of it sitting in front of me, I might change my opinion of that. So I'm really splitting hairs here, but they were all really nice beers, and I think if I was offered a pint of any one of these, I would be happily to drink it.
Andy?
Well, I agree with Steve. I found the original Belgian Abbey to be the most, kind of what I was looking for in the kind of fruitiness and esters from a Belgian beer, and maybe that's, I don't know, but that's kind of what I was looking for, or what I do kind of sometimes look for in these kind of beers. So I really, it appealed to me right from the start. And as I went through them, I found the Saison yeast. It seemed like it had a more of a firm bitterness, which I struggle to figure out quite how that's going to be. Just because they should be the same bitter. I mean, it's the same work, but I know that it does affect. For the yeast character does affect that. And it did have kind of a more, but on the other hand, Saisons can have that firm bitterness. So really nice. I was also surprised that the Belgian Abbey 2 was so much different from the Belgian Abbey. I don't know why I thought it wouldn't be, but I thought it would be kind of closer cousin. But it didn't. It was a little bit more different anyway to me. But I think my favorite was the original Belgian Abbey one.
It's very interesting. These beers are all so, well, there are a couple that are similar to me, but they're all so different that you do get down to personal preference at some point. I mean, it's all about what you like, and it's not that none of these are bad beers. It's just your personal preferences and what you're expecting and what you like. It's interesting that the three Arkansans kind of side along along the same lines, and the Canadians are on the other side of the fence. I like the 1214, the Belgian Abbey, the best. I came out with I wrote down spice and dark fruit, and I also wrote down circus peanuts. Do you guys have circus peanuts up there? The little pink circus. I got. So and it could be that it's similar. That reminds me a lot of my Belgian brunette that I brew. So maybe it's just familiarity that I like it. I thought the kind of flattest flavors were the 3787, the Trappist High Gravity, and the 1388 Belgian Strong Ale. I thought that they were kind of like the least interesting of the six. And I don't know why that is, but it just seems like there was not as many complexities in it. The French Saison, I was getting some dark fruit and a little bit of banana at the end. And then the Belgian Abbey 2, I was getting some like dark cherries or something like that. So it's so interesting that each of these, just changing the yeast in this recipe changed these beers so much. And it's also interesting to see how we differed on our preferences. It doesn't mean anybody's right or anybody's wrong. It's all in your palate and what you like. Any we got crows circling. So any other thoughts along those lines? I mean, anybody want to debate or agree or disagree or? Yeah, and then them's fighting words.
Yeah, no, in this kind of experiments, deciding which one's the better beer, because they're all the same beer. If I had to judge these, one of them might be a couple points higher than the other, but they'd all get about the same mark. It's pretty well the same beer. The malt's the exact same, the hop's the exact same. It's those little differences, and I picked this style because it's just kind of, I don't know, how many Belgian ambers do you have? It's not really trying to lump into a well-defined, it's a golden strong, we we know what that's supposed to be. It was supposed to be kind of a general beer and kind of to explore the different characters of the yeast, and I think it does a great job of that. Like, if you gave them the people in the pub and they were drinking, they would think it's probably the same beer if you switched. But if you're actually paying attention, they're different, and if you really focus, they're huge differences. And a lot of them where you wouldn't expect. And they're 3711. Like, the French Saison, I'm hugely partial to. The big fan of upright brewing, and that yeast, and I've used that in Saisons, and Matt has as well. Like, I really like that yeast, and having it in a darker beer like this is interesting. And you know, I get the numbers. They're close in gravity, but the 3711 by far was the highest attenuation. You really, that bitterness that Andy was talking about, that's where I see that coming from. That's attenuation is only super dry.
Right.
But what blew me away was the difference in the mouthfeel between some of them. The 3787, the Trappist, had a mouthfeel that I didn't pick up in any of the other beers. That was the most surprising thing to me. I thought flavor in general and everything, but there was a mouth there or a texture to it that is very different. That was really cool.
Well, all these are very well brewed, and my compliments to you for, you know, none of these are infected or ruined or, you know, or oxidized. So they're all well done. So you gave us the advantage of having a good sort of playing field to play on. So again, kudos for that. So are we ready? Any more comments, or are we ready to move on to the next round?
The only thing I'd say is that now that, you know, we've had these open for a while, and as we've been talking, I've been going back across them and smelling them again, and the aromatics are certainly kind of playing up now that they're starting to warm up a little more. So, you know, that's another thing. You know, maybe you need to spend a little time with each one and taste it as it evolves during your drinking session. You know.
I think that's what I was trying to get at, only you articulated it better than I did, that if I had a pint of any one of these beers in front of me, it's going to change in character as I drink that pint. So it's going to start out a little bit different than it's going to finish because of how it opens up as it breathes and gets some air to it. So, but I also think it's really interesting, and just based on the kind of the premise of the experiment, if I were to brew this recipe, I would choose 1214 as my yeast, just because for my mouth that really spoke to me pretty strongly. So that's it. That's my comments.
Yeah. And again, personal preference. You know, everybody. And if you have the and this may be a good club activity to do. You know, design the same recipe, or if you have a big brewing system with your club, split up the wort, divide, you know, between members and ferment out with different yeasts, just so you can get familiar with these two. Because hardly ever. I mean, I've brewed my Belgian brunette recipe serially, but never side by side with different yeasts. So it'd be interesting to do that.
Yeah, I'm a professional student essentially, so and in science, and I've kind of, I don't know, through doing these, and I brought a couple of these to meetings, the porter and this Belgian amber, and I've now become the guy that, you know, when people are talking about doing experiments, I listen in and tell them that you're doing it wrong. But as a club thing, it's really interesting. And if you were going to do it as a club activity, brew it at one person's house, ferment it there, split the costs. That's the only thing, because these were all brewed side by side, exact same temperature, exact same conditions. Because as soon as you change one of those things, like the porter recipe, which we, I don't know, the porter examples didn't turn out as well as they were when they were younger, and the reason that I decided with a specific yeast out of that, like the porter one was designed to go, which yeast do I want to choose as my main yeast? The Belgian was more to see, what do these yeasts taste like? And when I taste that yeast in this beer, what kind of beer do I want to brew with that yeast? Which is very different. And so for the porter one, when I brewed that, I brewed for, you know, the mash temperatures I used and everything, and the malt profile. I kind of went, in my mind, I imagine it being like this is kind of what I want to shoot for. And the Scottish, which we didn't get to have, but it was an old beer anyway, and probably wouldn't have made any difference. That gave me exactly what I wanted. Other people thought the Thames Valley was better because it was rounder and had a little bit more sweetness. And in my mind, as the person who brewed it, I could have mashed for more sweetness. I didn't go for that. I could have changed the grain bill for that, but I went for a dry porter. I wanted to see how dry it would be, just an average, plain recipe. How could it get there? And which is really interesting to, like, I would encourage anyone to do these experiments and split the cost because it's expensive. But it's really cool to see what the yeast can do, and it's really up to looking at the recipe. You can more than one way to skin a cat. Like, you can get to the same place in different ways. You can use different yeast, you can use different grain bills, but it's building the knowledge, I guess.
Right. Exactly. You got to know what's in your spice cabinet, so to speak. So we're moving on to a higher gravity beer.
Yeah. So this is Belgian Dark Strong, which is that Belgian Amber was the first one I'd ever done, and I haven't done many Belgian beers. This is kind of, I was doing that exercise with the English beers, and I wanted to start getting into Belgian beers, and I figured I might as well start on the right foot and do a couple of these yeast experiments. So this is, I repitched the exact same yeast from the cakes from those little 1 gallon fermenters, and did this Belgian Dark Strong, which with the OG was 1094, so a little bit bigger. It's got 2 pounds of sucrose in it, so that bumped it up, but mostly 2-row, bunch of Munich special bee honey malt, biscuit malt, and some chocolate malt for some color, Hallertau and Tettnang for flavor, and the exact same yeast. So we'll taste them in the same order, and if you guys remember what glasses you used, you can put them in the same glasses, and you don't need to rinse.
There you go. All right, we'll be back. Okay. These are big beers. Okay, we are now through the third flight, and this was not as difficult as the first round, but it was, to me, it was difficult because the first round the flavors were kind of muted because of the age of the beer. This one, it's difficult because the flavors are so powerful. I mean, the alcohol is in your face, and there's, you know, these Belgian yeasts are known for their spicy and fruity and all that. So, dang, this was difficult. Who wants to start? Are we going to start on this side? Andy, do you want to start?
Sure. All the beers were really delicious. There were a couple that were really, really dry, and then there were a couple that seemed more rich and full-flavored. There's one that actually seems to not have much carbonation at all. I think it's the Belgian Abbey one, and it seems to have a real rich burnt sugars and lots of kind of toffee and caramel kind of flavors to me. And the Saison, again, is got kind of that dryness, but of course the most dry to me were the ones that I would probably expect, the High Gravity and the Belgian Strong. They've dried out quite a bit, at least. So they seem a little hotter to me, maybe, because, you know, they seem drier.
So what's your favorite? Or should we reserve the favorite for the end? Okay. Overall impressions. Oh yeah, okay. Overall impressions, Steve.
That mostly what Andy said. I thought that I've lost my train of thought.
What Andy said.
What Andy said. So no, I didn't think that I had an actual point. The 1388, the Strong. It's really come to life for me as it's set and warmed up. And I don't get the heat off of that I do off of the 3787, the High Gravity. So I agree with you on the 3787, but I think the 1388 has really opened up. And then the 1214, the Abbey, when we first opened these, I thought it was the most floral. And my first note was that it had a lovely brown sugar spice about it. And I still say that. But the 1388 has, to my palate, kind of caught up with that. I really like both of those beers quite a bit. And, well, I like all these beers a lot. They're just really wonderful beers. So that's just my general impressions. The French Saison, when I first drank it, I got really nice plum notes off of it. I really liked the plum fruit that my palate picked up from that.
Danny?
I guess, well, so with the first one, I agree with what everyone else has said, but the first one, the 1214, is still, it didn't carbonate.
Yeah, what are your theories on that?
It's one of those scratch your head and go, damn it, didn't carbonate.
Forgot to put the priming sugar in that one.
No, it had priming sugar. I think it had some. When I poured it, I poured down the side and it was a little still, but Steve poured it and it was. You had foam on it. I didn't get any foam on mine. Can I return this to the waitress and ask for another? Or that one was really good. Like, it's still, but really, really nice flavors. And that was kind of it's the first one I tasted, so that kind of set the stage for the rest of them. It was really good. Despite being still. If that is carbonated, if that was carbonated, that would probably be my favorite out of all of them. But it's not, so it's not my favorite. The 1388 was really good. The Dark Crystal came through really strong in that one for me. I'm on the same note sheet as I was for the last batch, so anything different I noted. And 1762 was phenolic. It was really strong. That the Belgian Abbey 2 was, the phenolics came through a little bit more than in the Belgian Abbey 1, I thought, and in the Belgian Ardennes, so at home, if anyone out there knows what a Josterberry is, it's a cross between a blackcurrant and a gooseberry, and that there's a flavor in there that came through that, like, my mom makes that jam at home. That flavor I know, and that's my favorite. That one for me, just because that note was really cool, and I've never ever had that in a beer, and it really, really interesting. The Ardennes at that high gravity, which I'm sure it's recommended for on the Yeast thing and whatever, but I've never really heard recommendations for that for saisons and lower gravity stuff. But for the high gravity, that was my above and beyond my favorite. 3711. Super dry, and I'm sitting here with the alcohol numbers, so it's a little different for me to look at them. The phenolics in that kept the phenolic character of all of these beers was the most consistent with the 3711, in my opinion. From the amber to this, it's very much the same profile. It's interesting that if I did a blind test, I'm almost certain, yet I'm also a little liquored up, and it's been a long tasting. I'm pretty sure I could pick that one out. That's a very distinctive nose, and the Trappist, which was my favorite in the first round, not so much in this round, but it's good. They're all very interesting, and I really liked all of them. If I had a bottle of any of them, which I have a crap load at home, and very looking forward to driving back home and pulling up bottles of those, but they're all really interesting.
Matt?
I agree. The 1214, if that was carbonated, would be a runaway favorite of mine, and I think it still might be a favorite of mine. The burnt sugar and cherry and fruit aromas on that are just fantastic. 3787 I found a bit too phenolic, as well as the Ardennes, and the 1388 was another as a probably my favorite or close second to the 1214. Yeah, both of those ones were excellent. So I think we're more or less on the same page here, but yeah.
Yeah, to me, the 1214, the Belgian Abbey, it came right out with tons of brown sugar, and I'm with you. I wish it were carbonated. I'd love to taste that with that flavor profile. With the 1762, the Belgian Abbey 2, I got circus peanut again. And I'm gonna send you guys some circus peanuts so you can tell you can see what I'm talking about. As in you,
as me, not the listeners.
No, I'm not gonna send everybody who listens circus peanuts. That would, if I were Oprah, you get a circus peanut. You get a circus peanut. You get a circus peanut.
Made a card.
So anyway, I guess I would agree that the 1214 it carries over this to the second one. That it would be my favorite, just because I love the dark brown sugar flavors. Although the French Saison had some interesting, again, kind of fruity phenolics, and just amazing. It's just amazing the difference in these yeasts, and again, very well done with the brewing. And you guys didn't get to, Andy and Steve didn't get to say your favorites. What are your favorites?
Wow. I really liked the Belgian Abbey, the original Belgian Abbey. I don't really necessarily mind that it's so flat. I still liked it better than the others. You know, the 3711 was very interesting to me. I really liked it too. But yeah, I think, and the other thing that I want to mention is that the Belgian Abbey 2, when the lighter beer didn't seem to have as much phenolic, it wasn't as similar to the Belgian Abbey, the original Belgian Abbey. This one has much more of those kind of fruity phenolics that I liked in the original Belgian Abbey one on the first tasting. So, so if I have to pick the most carbonated one, I'd go with the Belgian Abbey 2 this time, if I was discounting the first one for being flat.
And I would have to pick actually the 1388 at the moment is my favorite, which is the strong, and it's only because my sample of the 1214 has kind of lost its oomph, and I just have just a dreg left. So I don't know. I mean, again, it's like to really do this right, I want like about an 8 ounce, 4 ounces of each one, and really take my time with them and see how they develop. But at the moment, the 1388 just still seems to retain that big brown sugar explosion that I just really like in these beers, and it's actually pretty strong in all these beers. So I don't want to say that the 3711, which is really dry, it still has a lot of brown sugar in it. So don't get me wrong, but now I'm talking like Regis Philbin, and so I'm going to have to conclude with 1388.
Now we get the stats. What's the alcohol levels on these?
Yeah, and there's small bottles, and honestly, you don't sample it or 400 sample. I don't think you would want, because right. We started with an OG at 1094, and going, so the 1214, the Belgian Abbey 1 was 11.4%.
Oh wow!
Finished at 1007. The 1388, which is the Belgian Strong Ale, went to 8.4, which is the lowest out of all of them. Oh. The 1762 Belgian Abbey 2 went to 12.1%. The Belgian Ardennes went to 10.1. The 3711 French Saison, 13%. Yeah. Right in the top. Yeah. And then the Trappist High Gravity was 12.3.
Wow, that's quite a range. And the range was 8 something to
8.4 to 13.
8.4 to 13. Wow, that's a big range.
Compared to the amber that we just had, which had a 0.6 range, 0.4 range or something like that. It was really close. This one's a huge range, and brewed the same beer, exact same beer, and took all that yeast and chucked it in the next one. There's no, like, the yeast numbers shouldn't be that different. Yeah. And there might be different, and there's a propagation issue and whatever, but they pretty much got a big pitching rate on all of them, more than they needed. But yeah, that's a huge difference in attenuation.
Wow, this has been incredible. I mean, I knew that this was going to be a long. I knew that this was going to be a lot of work, but it's fun work. We could be evaluating other things that are less fun to consume, circus peanuts for one. But but this is again, all of these beers were well brewed, and I would encourage people out there, if you don't know about your yeast, brew batches of beer. If you can, do side-by-side comparisons. Take notes, and really get to know your ingredients, and especially your yeast, because that's probably the most important ingredient that you put in your beer. So, Danny and Matt, thank you guys for coming down and sharing this with us.
Thank you.
Long drive, but well worth it.
And Andy and Steve, thank you guys as well.
You're welcome, James.
Thanks. It was wonderful.
Well, thanks again to Danny and Matt, and of course to Andy and Steve, too. That's probably the silliest that I've gotten on the program, I think. I usually don't like to get that silly and sloppy when we're recording, but that was a long tasting and difficult to tell the difference between some of those rounds. But I hope that you were able to take some notes and get some ideas for your next English or Belgian beer. it was certainly eye-opening for me, and interesting to see how especially between the 2 rounds of the Belgian yeasts, how the gravity of the wort affected how each of those yeasts performed. It's just it's like peeling an onion. You get into this thing, and it's just something. You answer one question, or try to answer one question, and you get a bunch of other questions. Which, by the way, I probably should have mentioned this at the top of the show, but we just blew right through our 6th anniversary. So the end of July marked the end of our 6th year of doing this program for you, and we're into our 7th. Holy smokes! I thought I was only going to do, I thought we'd run out of stuff to talk about after about 10 shows, and here we're sneaking up on 300. So I appreciate greatly everybody who's stuck with us this whole time, and I really appreciate Steve and Andy for hanging on this whole time. And I hope they're having fun as we're doing this, and I know that we're all learning a bunch of stuff. So before I get teary-eyed and sentimental, I'm gonna move on. If you have brewing questions, show suggestions, or just want to say howdy, write to james@basicbrewing.com, or just fill out the contact form on basicbrewing.com. And please don't forget to tell us where you're from. You can check out our DVDs on our website, Extract Brewing and Partial Mashing, Stepping into All Grain, Low-Tech Lagering and Decoction Mashing, and Introduction to Wine Kits as well. And we have dwindling numbers of the Brewer's Logbooks, the 2011 Brewer's Logbooks in stock. Get them while you can. Once they disappear off the shop, they're gone until we get the 2012 Brewer's Logbook, and we're sneaking up on the end of the year. So we also have combo deals to save you a few bucks if you want to buy more than one DVD at a time, and you can check out our Basic Brewing shirts in the store as well. You can see a listing of the fine folks across the country who sell our DVDs on basicbrewing.com, and if there isn't a vendor in your area, you can order them online in our online shop at basicbrewingshop.com. Thanks to everybody who's continued to click on our Amazon.com link. We appreciate the support there greatly. Our featured products this week that were purchased through the link are Adorable Crochet for Babies and Toddlers. 22 projects to make for babies from birth to 2 years. And The Authentic Animal, Inside the Odd and Obsessive World of Taxonomy. Taxidermy. So boy, man, we got that shows the range of listeners that we have out there. We go from crochet to taxidermy, all in 1 week. Thanks again, everybody. Could be the same people. I don't know. I can't tell who bought what, so no worries there. Just click on the Amazon.com logo on our site the next time you feel like Amazon shopping. Whether it's taxidermy or taxonomy, whatever, we appreciate your support. And don't forget, you can also join the American Homebrewers Association or subscribe to Brew Your Own magazine through the associate link on basicbrewing.com. That's all until next week. Until then, thanks for listening, everybody. I'm James Spencer. Production help for Basic Brewing Radio and our website is provided by Kelly Dotson. Basic Brewing Radio is a production of Active Voicing. We'll talk to you next time, everybody. So long.